This afternoon staged a spectacular march on the streets of Nairobi, praying for peace in the country. The faithful colored the streets with dance and music as they celebrated the annual Chariot Festival. This ancient celebration originated from India, which saw the faithful donate foodstuff to the needy. Mukami Mwaura now tells us more.
A colorful spectacle, one that has not been witnessed in the country in the recent past. The Hindu faithful came together to commemorate the Chariot Festival, an annual festival they believe brings them closer to their deity. And today, they carry a stronger message to Kenyans, that of prayer and peace for the country, something that has a lot to do with the recent rise in political temperatures. They danced and sang in celebration, going around the streets giving food to the needy. Children were not left behind in the celebration. The Chariot Festival, which has its origin in India, found its way in Kenya and was an opportunity for the masses to have a taste of the Hindu culture that is otherwise never displayed publicly. And for a moment, it reminds Kenyans of the beauty that we have in our diversity. Mukami Mwaura, KTN News.
All right, we're glad you're watching KTN News Weekend Prime tonight. The world marking International Day Against Torture. And we want to have that conversation with my guest in studio tonight. Joining me on my immediate right is IMLU medical practitioner, Dr. Andrew Kanye-Gashie. Thank you for being with us. Also with us is Victor Kariuki, who's a lawyer as well with IMLU. Gentlemen, we thank you for being here. Let's begin with, I was talking about International Day Against Torture, an understanding of really what torture is. Break it down for us, at least in the scope in which you deal with it.
Thank you. Thank you, Sophia. Good evening, viewers. When we talk about torture, we actually the word torture is derived from a Latin word meaning tortura, and it's actually implies twisting. What it means is any act of pain or suffering which is inflicted on an individual, and this could either be mental or it could be physical, with the consent of an official or a person at the authority. We emphasize that it should be probably an official, somebody in authority. It could be a policeman, it could be a military person, or it could even be a city council askari, or anybody who is in a position to, who has been appointed as a public official. Now, why would this be happening? It is because probably they want to obtain some information from the victim, or they want to get a confession from the victim, or sometimes they just want to coerce the victim.
So to you define it first, it's by an official?
I think it's important to emphasize that it's an official.
And number two, physical or psychological?
Physical or mental or psychological. Mental or psychological, we can use it interchangeably. Because even when there is a physical aspect, it may be very difficult to distinguish these two. Even when it is physical, there is always a mental aspect into it. Yes,
okay.
Yes.
So just for clarity's sake, so if there's a case of torture, somebody may suspect that's what they're undergoing at home in a domestic setup. This is not a matter that would come under your consideration, or you'd not, in essence, consider that to be torture?
Well, Sophia, strictly speaking, let's say if it's in a domestic environment whereby probably a wife is there is domestic violence, either by the wife or the husband or vice versa, we wouldn't strictly put that under torture, because remember, torture is actually defined through the UN Convention that sat in 1984 that came up with this definition. In a domestic violence situation, it is a different setting, and it's not considered to be torture.
It's not considered to be torture. Yes. Let me bring you in. 2016, why are we still talking about torture? Is it something that's prevalent here in Kenya?
Well, we would say that it's prevalent in Kenya only. What we have is that people in the course of interaction with government offices and officials, be it police officers, be it military people, or in cases of conflict, you are likely to have cases of torture happening. But they have been on a decline because people are able to now know their rights. They are able to articulate their issues with the relevant authorities and bodies. So you can say that it's not something that can be completely eliminated, but what you have heard is that there has been a steady decline because people are able now to take up any issues that they have with the persons who have inflicted the torture on them. They are able to follow up and get the reprieves that are available.
So what you're talking about, there's been a decline in as far as what? Do you have numbers you're talking here, what we had last year compared to what we have this year?
Well, at the moment, we do not have statistics as we sit here, but what we have is that we have had, from interaction with the people who have dealt with this kind of cases, many people are able to report to the relevant authorities, and in as much as we do not have the statistics as we sit here, we have had a general feel that there has been a decline in the number of cases.
Yeah. So in as far as painting for our viewers a picture, you're not able to, yes, you say there's a decline, but it's a feel, not from statistics. So there's really no research study that has been conducted to be able to at least look at where we are briefly.
Yes, I must say we don't have the absolute figures here, but what we have actually tended to notice is that the number of cases that have been reported has been on the decline. And we think probably by a significant margin, and probably of importance is probably from the time we enacted our constitution in 2010. And we do think that the fact that people are able to report the cases of torture, and they are a bit more open than before. They know their rights. Yeah, even by reading the constitution, we do not. They are able to report these cases. Right. We think the cases have been going down. But as I had mentioned earlier on, we are not yet out of the woods. We are not yet. The other thing is that even where they have been able to keep some statistics, we do think that torture is underreported by and large, because to the victim there is always a fear of re-victimization, or probably they feel even if they report, nothing will be done by the authorities. So we hardly ever get, we think what we see is just the tip of the iceberg, yeah, as far as torture is concerned.
Right, so now just to go to that report I talked about earlier, and of course we'll come back and also talk about whether IMLU gets involved in cases where we hear about cross-border torture, especially in the Saudi Arabia type of countries. We've heard of people who moved there for work, and cases of torture have been reported. Do you get involved in those kind of situations? But let's first go to this report where the Declaration on the Protection of All Persons from being subjected to torture or to cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment was adopted by the United Nations General Assembly in 1975. Now, the Constitution of Kenya also contains a progressive Bill of Rights and the non-degradable rights to freedom from torture. These, however, remain on paper in some instances, as reports of torture and violation of these rights are still being registered. As the world prepares to mark the International Day in support of victims of torture, some narrated their experiences to our Dr. Korir in the following report.
What was a trophy life 20 years ago is now a shell of painful memories that Maura, not his real name, and his wife would rather not recall. What started as a normal day in his usual business to put food on his young family's table ended up with a one-week narrative in the hands of the police. Maura endured a 3-day torture during this 1 week that left him scarred up until now.
Tulikuwa nagonga hapa na miguu na ile nini huko chini hii makoti na sijinaito nini. Saa tukapigwa alafu tukarudishwa ndani, lakini mimi nilikuwa na.
After release, he was not allowed to seek any medical care. It took him 6 months to get back to some semblance of life, a new life stained with anxiety and fear.
Sasa hakuna kwenda kwa hospitali, watu waende nyumbani, wale wanaenda nyumbani wakae nyumbani. Sasa mimi nilikuja hapa, nilikuwa tunakaa hapa. Sasa kuna kazi nilikuwa nafanya, nikakaa hapa, nikaa miezi 6 bila.
His wife's experience was no better. In the confines of her house, her then 3-week-old son, family held in her arms, did not restrain her abusers from beating her, even after falling to the cold, hard floor.
Unaona niko na mtoto. Sasa hata nilikuwa naona, kwa sababu matusi sasa iko, kugogwa iko, sasa hata wewe unasidwa ni namna gani na uko na mtoto. Sasa nikaona hata wanaweza ona huyu mtoto wangu hawatanichapa. Nikabeba vizuri. Sijui namna gani, niligogwa nikaketi chini.
The beatings that these two underwent marked the beginning of other health problems that they would have otherwise not encountered.
Kutoka hiyo mwaka mpaka sasa, hii mwaka sasa ndio na mambo hiyo ilinitoka kwa, ilikuwa nikinisubua. Hata naweza kaa jioni na sikukuwa nalala, nafikiria, ilikuwa nalia ovyo, lakini
kila siku hawezi tembea, hawezi nini. Kwenda choo tulifungilia kamba juu ya choo hapo kwa mti, tukafungilia kamba na tukaweka stool. Sasa ndio akienda haja kubwa anakalia yeye.
This period 2 decades ago is still fresh in the memories of other victims. They report of rape, gang rape. Some died and some have to live every day with their raw wounds. Worse every time they remember their ordeal.
Waliturepe, wakaturepe, kila mtu anaume 3 na wamefaa mabosori. Kutuachilia tena tukarudishwa kwa sel. Kesho yake hiyo Saturday tuliwachiliwa na huyo msichana. Kuachiliwa tukaambiwa nyinyi muende nyumbani na mkiongea hiyo maneno ni kukufa mtakufa.
With these experiences, victims of torture need a lot of care from medical practitioners, psychologists, lawyers, among others, to overcome this, or at least learn how to live life once again.
Scars of torture are not only mental or physical. As the world marks the International Day in support of victims of torture, these victims relive that experience. For KTN News, I'm Dr. Mercy Korir.
All right, the world marking International Day Against Torture, and we continue the discussion in studio with my guest tonight. So, in as far as, again, marking this day, what is the significance of it? Is it to raise awareness? Is it to tell people if torture is happening, you need to be able to report, and if so, where?
Yes, there are many reasons why we do celebrate this day. One of the reasons is that we would want to remember the victims of torture. As probably what has been narrated by the victim is that it has a lot of psychological effect. In fact, even in physical injuries, the wounds themselves may heal. But unfortunately, the psychological aspect of it is long-term. And that's why these people require long-term treatment. Unfortunately, they tend to get forgotten. And the problem is that, again, for themselves, sometimes they do have this guilt feeling that probably they were to blame. That's why they were tortured. And therefore, they don't come out of their, houses, and they don't mingle with the people. Right. So there is also a social aspect into torture. So the whole idea of having this day is, first of all, to remember those victims, and also to raise the awareness about torture. To tell people, yes, it is happening in our very own country, and we need to support the victims. Okay, they may go for treatment. In this case, they may even require a psychiatrist or a psychologist. But in the long run, they need to be assimilated back to the society. And that's why we need to raise an awareness among the public and tell them, yes, one may have been a victim, but they are still human beings and they need to get integrated back into the society.
So talk to us about what I was talking about before we went to that story about those that may be tortured that are Kenyans outside the country, like we've had households, for example, who will go domestic workers to work outside. Is that something that would be handled? Are there those kind of interactions between the two countries?
Normally what happens is that when somebody is tortured outside the country and such a case is brought to the attention of government officials, then it becomes an issue that is to be sorted out by the Foreign Affairs Ministry. And the ministry is able to make a protest in the country where the victim was. But the challenge has been that most of these cases are not reported, and they only come into the public domain when they have escalated, or where the victim has had to be flown back.
So they only reported to Foreign Affairs. Briefly, who do people report to? If there's someone watching there, like there's a person in authority abusing or torturing a certain individual, where do they report?
Well, unfortunately, probably even in the bill that is coming, it is indicated that the matter should be reported to the police. But you also realize that there is a problem there, because if you have been tortured by a policeman, then do you go and report it? But however, on the positive side, we do have organizations. An example is Independent Medical Legal Unit, IMLU in short, that are keen on rehabilitating these people. So if one becomes a victim, then they should actually report to the probably to the NGOs. However, it's also important to realize that we do have the Kenya Human Rights Commission, and it's actually mandated to look into these issues. Yes. So if one becomes a victim, you either report to Kenya Human Rights Commission, or you could probably report to the NGOs.
And so in terms of the law, there needs to be a relook, because already in itself, if it's the police that are the perpetrators, it becomes a challenge.
Yes, actually, there's also another body, the Independence Policing IPOIS, that deals with these cases. I'm also aware that there is a prevention of torture bill that has been lying in Parliament.
Yes.
So there is need to fast track the passing of that bill so that these cases are handled properly.
Unfortunately, our time is up, but we thank you for being with us in studio. Dr. Andrew Kanyi and Victor Kariuki, both of you being part of IMLU on the International Day Against Torture. Thank you so much for watching also and staying with us here on Weekend Prime. We take a break. When we return, sports news.